Dr. Eleanor Blackwood stood at the edge of the cemetery, her black coat flapping in the autumn wind. The leaves crunched under her feet as she watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. Her face remained expressionless, a mask she had perfected over years of boardroom battles and investor meetings. But today the mask served a different purpose, hiding a pain so deep it threatened to tear her apart from the inside. Her son Alexander was gone forever. Just 22 years old with his whole life ahead of him. The other mourners kept their distance. They weren't sure if it was respect for her grief or fear of the woman who had built a technology empire from nothing. Perhaps it was a bit of both. Eleanor had never been easy to approach even before tragedy struck. Dr. Blackwood. A soft voice broke through her thoughts. It was Dr. Chen, her company's research director and one of the few people she considered a friend. "The car is waiting whenever you're ready." Eleanor nodded but didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the coffin. Inside lay the body of the bright-eyed boy who used to run into her lab with wild ideas and wilder dreams. The same boy who grew into a young man with his mother's brilliance and a kindness she sometimes wished she possessed. "Just a few more minutes, James," she said. The funeral had been small, private. Eleanor had insisted on it. Alexander wouldn't have wanted a spectacle. He'd always been humble despite growing up with every privilege money could buy. Mountain climbing had been his passion, the one thing that made him feel truly alive. He'd told her once. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. The thing he loved had taken him from her. As the cemetery workers began shoveling dirt onto the coffin, Eleanor finally turned away. Her mind, always calculating, always looking for solutions, was already working. There was data to be gathered, research to be done. She was, after all, at the forefront of quantum computing technology. If anyone could find answers in the darkness, it would be her. Back at her mansion that evening, Eleanor paced her private laboratory. The wall of screens displayed Alexander's smiling face from various stages of his life. Her only child. The one person who had seen past her tough exterior. "Computer, access Project Afterthought files," she commanded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Project Afterthought files accessed," the AI system responded. "Warning. Research classified as theoretical. No practical applications approved by Ethics Committee." Eleanor laughed bitterly. Ethics Committee? What? Do they know about losing a child? She pulled up the research her team had been developing in secret for years. Blackwood Quantum Technologies publicly focused on revolutionizing computing, but Eleanor had always been interested in the deeper questions. The boundary between life and death, the nature of consciousness itself. These questions had been academic, until 3 days ago. Now they were painfully personal. The project had started as a way to map neural patterns after clinical death, to understand the final moments of consciousness. Her team had developed sensors that could detect quantum fluctuations, theoretically linked to thought patterns. It was all experimental, unproven, and exactly the kind of research that made traditional scientists uncomfortable. Eleanor stared at the prototype on her workbench. It looked like an ordinary camera, but inside was technology, years ahead of anything, available to the public. Technology that might detect something no one had ever measured before. She reached for her phone and dialed a number few people had access to. "This is Dr. Blackwood. I need to speak with Judge Hopkins immediately." Her tone left no room for refusal. Being worth billions had its advantages. 20 minutes later, she had what she needed, a court order allowing the temporary disinterment of her son's body for scientific research purposes. The judge owed her after she funded his last campaign. Eleanor didn't like calling in favors, but this was different. This was Alexander. "James," she said when Dr. Chen answered his phone. "I need you at the lab now, and I need absolute discretion." Dr. Chen arrived, looking worried. He'd been with Eleanor since the early days of the company, when they were working out of a garage with more dreams than funding. He'd seen her through triumphs and setbacks, but never through grief. "What's going on?" he asked, eyeing the equipment she had laid out. Eleanor handed him the court order. "We're installing the quantum neural camera in Alexander's coffin tonight." Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Eleanor, you can't be serious. That technology isn't ready. We've only tested it on lab animals, and even those results were inconclusive at best. I don't care, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My son is dead. If there's even a 1% chance this works, I'm taking it. Works to do what exactly? Dr. Chen asked carefully. What are you hoping to find? Eleanor turned to face the wall of screens showing Alexander. In one video, he was 5 years old, building a complex structure with magnetic blocks. In another, he was receiving his university diploma, looking back at the camera with a grin that was all for his mother. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe nothing, maybe something. Residual neural patterns, quantum imprints. Something science hasn't named yet. She closed her eyes briefly. I need to know if any part of him is still somewhere. Dr. Chen looked at his friend and boss with sadness and concern. Grief was making her grasp at scientific straws. But he also knew Eleanor well enough to understand she would do this with or without his help. The risk to your reputation, he began. I don't care about my reputation, Eleanor snapped. I care about my son. And if we find nothing? He asked gently. Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. Then at least I tried everything. I can't just sit in board meetings and pretend the world hasn't ended. By midnight, they had assembled a small team of Eleanor's most trusted engineers. No one questioned why they were installing experimental equipment in a coffin. The paycheck from Blackwood Quantum Technologies bought their skills and their silence. The cemetery was eerily quiet as workers disinterred Alexander's coffin under the watchful eye of a court representative. Eleanor supervised personally, insisting the coffin remain closed during the entire process. The camera needs to be positioned exactly right, she instructed, as her team carefully drilled a small hole in the coffin's side. The power supply has to last for months, possibly years. Dr. Chen watched his friend with growing concern. This wasn't healthy grieving. This was something else, something that bordered on obsession, but he helped anyway, calibrating the equipment with precision. The installation took less than an hour. Before the coffin was reburied, Eleanor placed her hand on its polished surface. I'll find you, she whispered, words only she could hear. Back at her mansion, Eleanor set up the receiving station for the camera's data. The quantum signals would be weak, requiring powerful computers to detect and interpret them. She programmed the system to alert her to any patterns that rose above random noise. Days passed, then weeks. Eleanor attended board meetings remotely, her mind elsewhere. Her company's stock dipped as rumors spread about her mental state. Investors became nervous. But Eleanor Blackwood had built her empire through single-minded determination, and that same quality now focused entirely on the data streaming from her son's grave. She barely slept. When she did, it was at her desk, surrounded by graphs and readouts. Dr. Chen brought her food she didn't eat and advice she didn't take. You need to rest, he told her one evening. Alexander wouldn't want this. Alexander would understand better than anyone, she replied without looking up from her screens. He always believed in pushing boundaries. There's pushing boundaries. And then there's… Dr. Chen gestured at the lab, at Eleanor's disheveled appearance, at the weeks of obsessive monitoring. This isn't healthy. Eleanor finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but intense. Do you know what Alexander said to me the last time I saw him, before he left for that climb? She didn't wait for an answer. He said, Mom, the best view comes after the hardest climb. He wasn't just talking about mountains. Dr. Chen sighed. And what if there's no view at all this time? What if it's just the end? Then I'll know I tried everything, Eleanor said, turning back to her work. But I'm not giving up yet. The world continued turning outside Eleanor's lab. Her company launched new products she had designed months earlier. The business press speculated about her absence from public events. Some wondered if grief had broken the famous Dr. Blackwood's brilliant mind. Eleanor didn't care. Her universe had narrowed to the stream of data from the cemetery, to the patterns she searched for in the quantum noise. Most scientists would have called it a waste of time, a fool's errand, born of denial. But Eleanor Blackwood hadn't become a billionaire by listening to doubters, and somewhere deep in her heart, beneath the scientist's rational mind, was a mother who simply couldn't let go. Not yet. Not without trying everything humanly possible and perhaps a few things that weren't. So she watched, and she waited, for a sign, for hope, for anything that might prove that death wasn't the absolute end she had always believed it to be. Until that moment came, she would keep searching through the darkness, one quantum particle at a time. A month passed with nothing but noise in the data. Eleanor barely left her lab, existing on coffee and determination, and the staff at Blackwood Quantum Technologies whispered about their boss, wondering if grief had pushed her brilliant mind over the edge. Board members called emergency meetings. Shareholders grew nervous. The company's stock dropped 15% in 2 weeks. None of it mattered to Eleanor. The empire she'd built over 20 years suddenly seemed hollow without Alexander to share it with, without Alexander to inherit it. Dr. Chen was her only regular visitor, bringing food she rarely ate and updates she barely heard. On this particular morning, he arrived with a folder tucked under his arm and concern etched deeper than usual on his face. "The board is calling for a vote of no confidence," he said without preamble. "They want to remove you as CEO temporarily. They're using the term compassionate leave." Eleanor looked up from her screens, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Let them try. Eleanor, please. You still own controlling interest, but if you keep ignoring the company can run itself for a while." She cut him off. "That's why I hired all those overpaid executives." Dr. Chen sighed and set down a sandwich next to her keyboard. "You need to eat something, and maybe shower. When was the last time you slept in an actual bed?" Eleanor ignored the questions. "Look at this," she said instead, pointing to one of her screens where data scrolled endlessly. "I'm seeing spikes in the quantum field readings. They're faint, but they're there." Dr. Chen leaned closer. He had been Eleanor's research partner long enough to understand what the readings meant. Or rather, what they might mean if one was desperate enough to see patterns in noise. "That could be anything," he said gently. "Soil movement, temperature fluctuations, electronic interference. We designed these sensors to be incredibly sensitive, remember?" "It's not random," Eleanor insisted. "Run the pattern recognition algorithm I developed last week." Dr. Chen did as she asked. Knowing argument was pointless. The computer churned through the data, comparing the quantum fluctuations against known patterns. After several minutes, it displayed its analysis. Confidence level, 9.2%. Possible match. Neural activity, mammalian, highly degraded. 9% isn't statistically significant, Dr. Chen pointed out. "It's not zero either," Eleanor countered, her voice taking on an edge of excitement that worried her friend even more than her depression had. "We're detecting something, James. Something that shouldn't be there according to conventional science." Dr. Chen chose his next words carefully. "Even if there is some kind of quantum activity happening, that doesn't mean it's him. It doesn't mean it's Alexander." Eleanor swiveled in her chair to face him fully. For the first time in weeks, there was a spark in her eyes. What if it is? What if consciousness leaves an imprint? What if it doesn't just end? "Eleanor, please. This isn't healthy. I need to follow the data," she interrupted. "That's what scientists do. We don't dismiss anomalies because they're uncomfortable or because they don't fit our preconceptions." Dr. Chen ran a hand through his graying hair. "And what about the company? The people who depend on you for their livelihoods?" Eleanor turned back to her screens. 2 more weeks. If I don't find anything conclusive in 2 weeks, I'll go back to being the good little CEO. It was a concession, at least. Dr. Chen nodded reluctantly. "I'll hold off the board, but you need to make at least a brief appearance at next week's product launch." "People are talking, Eleanor." She waved a hand dismissively. "Fine, I'll be there. Now let me work." After Dr. Chen left, Eleanor refined her detection algorithms again, pushing the quantum sensors to their limits. She knew she was walking a fine, line between scientific inquiry and wishful thinking. Part of her, the rational, skeptical scientist she had always been, whispered that she was simply unable to accept her son's death, that she was using technology to avoid facing grief. But another part, the part that had always seen possibilities others missed, urged her forward. If anyone could find something new at the boundary between life and death, it was Eleanor Blackwood. The next day, she forced herself to shower and change into fresh clothes. She even managed to eat a proper meal, not for her own sake, but because she needed her mind sharp. The data was showing more frequent anomalies now, patterns that hovered just at the edge of significance. As promised, Eleanor made an appearance at the product launch the following week. She stood on stage in her trademark black suit, presenting the company's newest quantum processor with practiced ease. If anyone noticed the dark circles under her eyes or the slight tremor in her hands, they didn't mention it. Dr. Blackwood was back, and the company's stock rose 8% before the event was even over. But Eleanor's mind remained in her private lab, with the data streaming from her son's grave. The brief return to normal life only highlighted how empty everything felt without Alexander. The applause, the adoration of the tech press, the billions in her accounts, all of it seemed pointless now. She returned to her research with renewed intensity. 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. Dr. Chen stopped trying to pull her away and instead focused on protecting her from the board and from herself. He arranged for meals to be delivered, made sure she at least napped occasionally, and kept the most aggressive board members at bay with carefully worded updates on her condition. She's working through her grief in her own way, he told them. Dr. Blackwood has always processed emotions through scientific work. Give her time. It wasn't entirely a lie. Eleanor was indeed working through something, but whether it was grief or obsession was becoming harder to distinguish. 5 months after Alexander's death, Eleanor made a breakthrough. She had been refining her sensors and algorithms continuously, pushing them beyond what even her own team had thought possible. The quantum fluctuations from the grave now showed patterns that matched neural activity with a confidence level of 63%. It's still not proof, Dr. Chen cautioned when she showed him the results. And even if we are detecting some kind of residual neural pattern, that doesn't mean there's consciousness or awareness. I know, Eleanor said. She looked different somehow, thinner, more intense, but also more focused than she had been in the early days after Alexander's death. But something is happening there that science can't yet explain, and I'm going to find out what it is. She began working on a new device, one that could not just detect but potentially interact with the quantum patterns. It was theoretical technology, the kind that usually took years to develop, but Eleanor worked with fevered intensity, barely sleeping. Her mind had always been brilliant, but grief and determination had honed it to a razor's edge. The device looked simple enough, a small black box with a screen and a quantum interface, but inside was technology that pushed the boundaries of what was currently possible. If it worked as Eleanor hoped, it might be able to convert the quantum patterns into visual data, into something she could actually see. Dr. Chen watched the project with a mixture of professional fascination and personal dread. He had known Eleanor long enough to understand that she wouldn't stop until she either found what she was looking for or conclusively proved it wasn't there, but he feared what either outcome might do to her fragile emotional state. "What exactly are you hoping to see?" he asked one evening as Eleanor calibrated the new device. She paused, her fingers hovering over the controls. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe just random patterns, maybe something more." She looked up at him, and for a moment her mask slipped. "I just need to know, James. I need to know if any part of him is still somewhere, anywhere." The night Eleanor finally activated the device, a storm raged outside her mansion. Rain lashed against the windows of her lab as lightning illuminated the room in brief, harsh flashes. It was the kind of dramatic setting that Alexander would have appreciated. He'd always had a flair for the theatrical. Eleanor sat alone at her desk, Dr. Chen having gone home hours earlier. The quantum interface hummed softly as it connected to the sensors in Alexander's grave. On the screen, Static flickered, occasionally forming shapes that dissolved before they could be recognized. "Come on," Eleanor whispered, adjusting the settings. "Show me something, anything." For hours, nothing happened beyond the random patterns of quantum noise. Eleanor's eyes grew heavy, her head nodding forward as exhaustion finally began to overcome even her iron will. Just as she was about to give up for the night, the screen flickered differently. The static resolved into a shape. Brief, unstable, but unmistakable. A mountain peak. Eleanor jerked fully awake, her heart pounding. The image lasted only seconds, before dissolving back into static, but she had seen it clearly. A snow-covered mountain peak against a clear blue sky. The exact view from Alexander's favorite climbing spot, the place he had described to her so many times she could picture it perfectly. The place he had died. Eleanor's hands trembled as she adjusted the settings, trying to recapture the image. "Alexander?" she whispered, her voice catching. "Are you there?" The static swirled, forming and reforming. For a brief moment, Eleanor thought she saw the outline of a hand reaching toward the screen. Then it was gone. Eleanor stared at the screen, long after the image had disappeared, her heart racing. She reached for her phone with trembling hands and called Dr. Chen. "You need to come over." "Now," she said without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Eleanor, it's 3 a.m, came the groggy reply. "I saw something, James. On the screen, I saw the mountain where Alexander died." There was a pause, then the sound of movement. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't do anything until I arrive." Eleanor hung up and turned back to the device. She adjusted settings, recalibrated sensors, trying desperately to recapture what she had seen. But the screen showed only static now. Occasional swirls that might have been patterns or might have been nothing at all. By the time Dr. Chen arrived, damp from the rain and looking worried, Eleanor had worked herself into a state of tense excitement. "Crew." "Me," he said, dropping his coat on a nearby chair. Eleanor replayed the recording from the device. The image was there, grainy and unstable, but definitely a mountain peak against a sky. Dr. Chen watched in silence, his expression cautious. "It could be a glitch," he said finally, "or pattern recognition gone wrong. Our brains are designed to see meaning in random noise." "It's not random," Eleanor insisted. "That's the exact view Alexander described to me. The one from his favorite climbing spot. The last thing he might have seen before he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen sat down heavily in the chair beside her. "Even if it is an actual image from the sensors, we don't know what it means. It could be a stored memory somehow imprinted on the quantum field. It could be an echo. It doesn't necessarily mean consciousness." "I know that," Eleanor snapped, then softened her tone. "I'm a scientist too, remember? But whatever this is, it's something new, something important." Dr. Chen looked at his friend closely. She was thinner than before, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was also a new energy about her. The crushing grief that had threatened to destroy her had been replaced by purpose. "What's your next step?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "I need to refine the interface, make it more sensitive, more stable, and I need to find a way to communicate back, not just receive." "Communicate?" Dr. Chen looked alarmed. "Eleanor, even if we're detecting some kind of quantum imprint, that doesn't mean—" "I know what it means and what it doesn't," she cut him off. "But I need to explore every possibility. That's what scientists do, isn't it? Test hypotheses?" Dr. Chen sighed. He knew that look. It was the same one she'd had 20 years ago when everyone said her quantum computing approach was impossible. The same look she'd had when she decided to raise Alexander alone after his father walked out, while simultaneously building a tech empire. Eleanor Blackwood did not give up. Not ever. "What do you need from me?" he asked simply. "Access to the company's most advanced quantum processors, and a small team of our best engineers who can keep quiet about what we're doing." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "I'll make it happen. But Eleanor, you need to set limits for yourself. A timeline. If this doesn't lead anywhere after a certain point, it will lead somewhere, Eleanor said with absolute certainty. I don't know where yet, but this is just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor threw herself into the work with renewed purpose. She ate regular meals, got at least a few hours of sleep each night, and even attended board meetings. Remotely. Not because she cared about the company's stock price, but because she needed resources and cooperation to continue her research. The small team Dr. Chen assembled worked in Eleanor's private lab, sworn to secrecy. They were the best minds Blackwood Quantum Technologies had to offer, and they were intrigued by the challenge even if they didn't fully understand its purpose. Eleanor kept the true nature of the project hidden from all but Dr. Chen, telling the others only that they were developing new ways to detect and interpret quantum patterns. The team made rapid progress. The new interface was far more stable, capable of maintaining connections for longer periods. The images appeared more frequently now, always the same mountain peak, sometimes with subtle variations in lighting or cloud patterns. Dr. Chen remained skeptical but couldn't deny the results. These patterns are too consistent to be random, he admitted one evening as they reviewed the data. But I still don't understand what we're seeing. Neither do I, Eleanor said. Not completely. But I have theories. Her main theory, which she kept mostly to herself, was that consciousness might leave an imprint on the quantum field. Not a ghost or a soul in the traditional sense, but information, patterns that persisted after death. If that were true, then perhaps those patterns could be detected, interpreted, and even interacted with using the right technology. It was a theory that would have gotten her laughed out of any serious scientific conference. But Eleanor wasn't interested in peer approval anymore. She was interested only in results. The breakthrough came almost exactly 6 months after Alexander's death. Eleanor was alone in the lab late at night, running tests on the latest version of the interface. The team had added a new component, a simple input system that could send pulses into the quantum field, potentially interacting with whatever patterns were there. Eleanor typed a simple message into the system. Alexander? For several minutes, nothing happened. The screen showed the usual static with occasional glimpses of the mountain peak. Eleanor was about to try again when the pattern changed. The static swirled, formed, reformed. Not into the mountain this time, but into what looked like letters. Unstable, flickering but recognizable. H-E-R-E. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, not trusting what she was seeing. The letters held for a few seconds, then dissolved back into static. With shaking hands, she typed again. Alexander, is that you? The wait seemed eternal. Then, slowly, new letters formed on the screen. C-O-L-D. Eleanor felt her heart pounding in her chest. This couldn't be happening. It defied everything she knew about death, about consciousness, about reality itself. And yet the evidence was right in front of her. She tried again. Where are you? The response came faster this time. D-A-R-K. Eleanor's scientific mind raced through possibilities. Was she really communicating with her son's consciousness? Or was this some kind of echo, a pattern of information left behind like footprints in sand? Or was it something else entirely, some aspect of quantum physics that no one had discovered? Yet she needed to know more. She typed, "What do you see?" The screen swirled again, but instead of letters, the image of the mountain peak returned clearer than ever before. It held steady for almost a minute before dissolving. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her mind reeling with implications. If consciousness could leave an imprint that could be detected and communicated with, it would change everything. Science, philosophy, religion, humanity's understanding of death itself. But she wasn't thinking as a scientist at that moment. She was thinking as a mother. I miss you, she typed, tears blurring her vision. The response was almost immediate. M-O-M. That single word broke something in Eleanor. For the first time since Alexander's death, she wept openly, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She wept for her son, for herself, for the cruel universe that had taken him from her. When Dr. Chen arrived the next morning, he found Eleanor still at her desk, eyes red from crying but with a look of fierce determination on her face. "We made contact," she said simply, showing him the recorded interactions. Dr. Chen watched the footage in stunned silence. His scientific mind immediately began listing alternative explanations, system glitches, pattern recognition errors, even the possibility that Eleanor had somehow faked the responses in a grief-induced psychosis. But he knew Eleanor too well to believe she would falsify data, even to herself. And the patterns were too specific, too responsive to be explained away easily. "What does this mean?" he asked finally. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes clearer and more focused than they had been in months. "It means we're just scratching the surface. It means everything we thought we knew about death might be wrong. It means my son is—" She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Not gone. Not completely. Or it means his consciousness left an imprint that we're detecting," Dr. Chen said carefully. "An echo, not the person himself." "Maybe," Eleanor conceded. "But even that would change everything we know about consciousness, about quantum physics." "What's your next step?" Dr. Chen asked, recognizing the familiar determination in his friend's voice. Eleanor's gaze returned to the screen where the recording showed those simple, world-changing words. "We need to understand what this is. Truly understand it. And to do that, we need better equipment, better algorithms, more processing power." She looked back at Dr. Chen, a fire in her eyes that had been missing since Alexander's death. "We need to build something new." News of Eleanor's breakthrough spread through Blackwood Quantum Technologies like wildfire, despite Dr. Chen's efforts to keep it quiet. The small team working on the project grew, then grew again. The company's best engineers were pulled from other projects. Resources poured in. Eleanor returned to the company full-time but with a new focus. "We're creating a new division," she announced to the board. "Quantum Consciousness Research. I'll head it personally." The board members exchanged nervous glances. "Dr. Blackwood," one of them said carefully, "while we're pleased to see you taking an active role in the company again, we have concerns about allocating significant resources to such speculative research." Eleanor fixed him with a cold stare. "Speculative? 20 years ago, practical quantum computing was speculative. Now it's the foundation of this trillion-dollar company." She looked around the table. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what's happening." No one argued. They had seen that look before. In her private lab, work continued around the clock. The communications with whatever existed in the quantum field around Alexander's grave became more frequent, more coherent. The responses evolved from single words to short phrases. "Remember Blue Lake" appeared one day, referring to a camping trip Eleanor and Alexander had taken when he was 12. "Your birthday cake came another time," recalling a disaster from his teenage years that had become a family joke. These specific memories convinced Eleanor that she was indeed communicating with some aspect of her son's consciousness. Dr. Chen remained cautious. "These could be memories you shared with him," he pointed out. "Information that already existed in your own mind, somehow reflected back to you through the system." Eleanor shook her head. "Then how do you explain this?" She showed him another message that had appeared the previous night. "Dad called last." Dr. Chen frowned. "What does it mean?" "Alexander's father left when he was 3. He never called, never sent a birthday card. Nothing. But apparently he called Alexander last year. I never knew that. Alexander never told me. Is there any way to verify it?" Eleanor nodded. "I'm having my team check phone records, but I already know it's true. It explains why Alexander seemed upset last Thanksgiving, but wouldn't tell me why." The verification came back positive. A call from a number registered to Robert Winters, Alexander's father, had indeed come through to Alexander's phone 11 months earlier. The call had lasted 8 minutes. Dr. Chen's skepticism wavered. It's remarkable, he admitted. But there could still be explanations that don't involve communicating with the dead. Maybe you knew about the call subconsciously. Maybe you saw a phone bill or overheard Alexander mentioning it. Or maybe, Eleanor said with a hint of irritation, maybe we're actually discovering something new about consciousness and its relationship to quantum fields. As the communications continued, Eleanor developed a more sophisticated interface. The new system included a neural link that allowed her to send thoughts directly without typing, and to receive responses as images and impressions, rather than just text on a screen. It's more intuitive this way, she explained to Dr. Chen as technicians fitted her with sensors. Consciousness doesn't work in words and letters, it works in images, feelings, concepts. Dr. Chen watched with growing concern. Eleanor's obsession had taken on a new dimension. She spent hours each day connected to the system, communicating with whatever existed in the quantum field around her son's grave. Eleanor, I'm worried about you, he said one evening after the technicians had left. This is consuming you. It's the most important discovery in human history, she replied without looking up from her preparations. Of course it's consuming me. But at what cost? When was the last time you left this lab? When was the last time you did anything that wasn't related to this project? Eleanor finally looked at him. My son is dead, James. Or at least his body is, but some part of him still exists. Would you have me ignore that? Would you have me go to charity galas and product launches and pretend nothing has changed? Dr. Chen sighed. No. But I want you to consider the possibility that whatever you're communicating with might not be Alexander. Not completely. And attaching yourself to it so completely might be preventing you from actually processing your grief. Eleanor's expression hardened. I don't need therapy. I need answers, and I'm close to getting them. The new neural interface went live on a rainy Tuesday night. Eleanor sat in a specially designed chair, sensors attached to her temples and wrists. The system hummed to life around her. Recording begins now, a technician announced. Neural link activating in 3, 2, 1. Eleanor closed her eyes as the connection formed. Unlike previous interactions, which had been limited to text and simple images, this was immersive. In her mind's eye, she saw the mountain peak, Alexander's mountain. But now she was standing on it, feeling the cold wind on her face, seeing the vast landscape spread out below. And she wasn't alone. A figure stood at the edge of the peak, back, turned to her, looking out at the view. Alexander, she thought, sending the question through the neural link. The figure turned slowly. It was him, but not quite. Slightly transparent, like an image reflected in water. He smiled, and Eleanor felt her heart constrict with a mixture of joy and pain. Mom, came the response, not in words but in a feeling, an impression that formed in her mind. You found me. Are you really here? She asked. Are you really Alexander? The figure seemed to consider this, head tilting slightly. I'm what's left, memories, patterns, echoes. But you know things I don't know, Eleanor pressed. The call from your father. Alexander nodded. Some things stay with us, important things. Where are you? Eleanor asked the scientist in her still seeking concrete answers. What is this place? Alexander gestured to the mountain around them. This is where I was last whole. This is where the pattern broke and reformed. You mean where you died? A sad smile. Death is the wrong word. It's more like changing states, like ice becoming water, water becoming steam. Eleanor tried to move closer, but the figure of her son remained the same distance away. Can you come back? Can we fix the pattern? Alexander shook his head. No, that's not how it works. I'm not trapped, Mom. I'm just different now. Eleanor felt tears on her physical face, though in this mental space she remained dry-eyed. I miss you so much. I know. The figure of Alexander looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold impossible wisdom. But you need to let me go. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. No, that's why I built all this. To find you, to reach you. And you did. Alexander's form began to flicker slightly. But I'm not meant to stay connected to that world anymore. And you're not meant to stay connected to this one. I can make the connection stronger, Eleanor insisted. I can make it permanent. I can... Mom. The single word, impression, stopped her. You've achieved something amazing. You've proven that consciousness leaves an imprint, that something remains. But trying to hold on to that imprint is like trying to hold on to a reflection in water. The more you grasp, the more it breaks apart. Eleanor felt a sudden chill. The mountain scene around them began to dissolve at the edges, breaking into swirls of quantum static. What's happening? She asked, panic rising. You need to live, Mom, Alexander said, his form growing fainter. You need to use what you've learned, to help others understand, not to try to bring back what's gone. Don't go, Eleanor begged. Please don't leave me again. Alexander smiled one last time. I'm not leaving. I'm just not here in the way you want me to be. The pattern continues, just in a different form. The mountain vanished completely. Alexander's form flickered once more, then dissolved into points of light that swirled around Eleanor like stars. Remember me, came his final impression. But don't hold on to me. Let me go. In the physical world, Eleanor screamed, a sound of such primal anguish that the technicians jumped back from their stations. Tears streamed down her face as the neural connection began to overload with emotional feedback. Shut it down, Dr. Chen shouted. Shut it down now. The technicians scrambled to comply, disconnecting Eleanor from the system as alarms blared throughout the lab. She slumped in the chair, sobbing uncontrollably as Dr. Chen rushed to her side. Eleanor, he said, taking her hand. What happened? What did you see? Through her tears, Eleanor looked up at her friend. Her expression was one of devastating loss, but there was something else there too. A kind of peace, or at least the beginning of it. I saw him, she whispered. I really saw him. And he's gone, James, he's really gone. The weeks following Eleanor's breakdown were quiet. She took a leave of absence from the company, not because the board forced her to, but because she needed time to process everything that had happened. Dr. Chen kept the quantum consciousness research division running, carefully documenting all they had learned, but no one attempted to use the neural interface again. Eleanor retreated to her beach house, a property she had purchased years ago, but rarely visited. There, with only the sound of waves for company, she began the real work of grieving, something she had avoided by throwing herself into research. She walked along the shore each morning, watching the sun rise over the ocean. She cooked simple meals for herself instead of having them delivered. She slept, sometimes dreamlessly, sometimes with dreams of Alexander on his mountain, smiling and free. Slowly, the crushing weight of grief began to transform into something else, not lighter exactly, but different, more bearable. A sadness that could be carried rather than one that threatened to destroy her. After a month, Dr. Chen came to visit. They sat on the deck overlooking the beach, drinking tea as the sun set. The team is making progress organizing the data, he said. The evidence is compelling. Even the skeptics are having trouble explaining away what we recorded. Eleanor nodded, watching a seagull circle over the waves. What are you telling them about the final session, about what I saw? Dr. Chen sipped his tea before answering. Only what you approved. That you made contact with a coherent consciousness pattern, that shared memories only Alexander would have known. That the pattern communicated it was not trapped or suffering, but had transformed into a different state of being. Not that it told me to let go? Eleanor asked with a sad smile. I thought that part might be personal. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. What will you do with the research? Dr. Chen finally asked. It could change everything, our understanding of death, of consciousness itself. Eleanor had been thinking about that question for weeks. We'll publish it, she said. Not all at once and not sensationalized. carefully, methodically, with all the proper peer review, the way real science should be done. There will be those who call it pseudoscience, Dr. Chen warned, who will say you were driven by grief to see patterns that weren't there. Let them, Eleanor said with a shrug. The data speaks for itself, and we'll continue the research, not just with Alexander, but with other subjects under strict ethical guidelines. We'll refine the technology, improve the methodology, but not with the neural interface. Dr. Chen asked cautiously. Eleanor shook her head. No, that was too intimate, too personal, and ultimately not the right approach. She turned to look at her friend directly. Alexander was right. We're not meant to hold on to those who have passed. We're meant to understand that something continues, but in a form we shouldn't try to grasp or control. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. And what about you? Will you come back to the company? Yes, Eleanor said, but not the same way as before. I've been thinking about establishing a foundation, the Alexander Blackwood Institute for Consciousness Studies. Sounds ambitious? Eleanor smiled. When have I ever been anything else? The smile faded as she looked back out at the darkening ocean. But this time it's not about building something for myself, or even for Alexander. It's about understanding something fundamental about what it means to be human, to be conscious, to exist at all. 3 months later, Eleanor stood at a podium in the newly established Alexander Blackwood Institute. The building, a sleek glass and steel structure overlooking the same mountain range where Alexander had died, housed the most advanced quantum research facility in the world. Behind her sat Dr. Chen and a dozen other scientists from around the globe, all pioneers in their fields. Before her were reporters, academics, and curious members of the public. Thank you all for coming, Eleanor began, her voice steady. She looked different now, still thin, but healthier, her eyes clear and focused. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our understanding of consciousness. She gestured to the screens behind her, where data from the quantum sensors scrolled, in patterns that most of the audience couldn't begin to comprehend. 6 months ago, following the death of my son Alexander, I began a research project born out of grief and desperation. I wanted to find him, to hold on to him, to deny the reality of death itself. She paused, letting the words sink in. What I found instead was something far more profound. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Eleanor Blackwood rarely gave speeches anymore, and never personal ones. Our research has detected consistent, responsive patterns in the quantum field surrounding recently deceased organisms, patterns that contain information specific to those individuals. Memories, experiences, personality traits, patterns that cannot be explained by current scientific understanding. Murmurs ran through the crowd. On the screens, the data shifted to show recordings from the project, the mountain peak, the text responses, graphs of quantum activity. These patterns are not ghosts or souls in the traditional sense, Eleanor continued. They're not conscious entities trapped between worlds. Rather, they appear to be imprints left on the quantum field itself, echoes of consciousness that gradually disperse and transform over time. She clicked to the next screen, showing a complex diagram of how consciousness might interact with quantum fields during life and after death. We don't yet fully understand what this means, but the implications are enormous, not just for our understanding of death, but for our understanding of consciousness itself. If consciousness leaves an imprint on the quantum field, then it must interact with that field during life in ways we've only begun to explore. Eleanor took a deep breath before continuing. This institute will be dedicated to that exploration, not to communicating with the dead or bringing them back. That's not possible, and it's not the point. The point is to understand consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe, one that may continue in some form even after what we call death. A reporter raised his hand. Dr. Blackwood, critics are already saying this research is tainted by your personal grief, that you've built a very expensive monument to denial. How do you respond to that? Eleanor didn't flinch. I would say they're half right. This research did begin in grief. in my desperate attempt to deny the reality of my son's death. But what it revealed was something much more important than my personal feelings. It revealed an aspect of reality we've been blind to, and now that we can see it, we have a responsibility to understand it. Another hand went up. Will you be continuing your personal communications with your son's pattern? Eleanor shook her head. No. That chapter is closed. Alexander's pattern has already begun to disperse, as all such patterns do. And that's as it should be. She smiled slightly. We're not meant to hold on to the dead. We're meant to remember them, to learn from them, and then to let them go. After the press conference, Eleanor stood alone by the Institute's large windows, looking out at the mountains where Alexander had died. Dr. Chen joined her, hands in his pockets. Well, that went better than expected, he said. Only 3 reporters accused us of pseudoscience and none mentioned seances. Eleanor laughed softly. Give it time. We have years of work ahead to convince the scientific community this is real. Are you ready for that fight? Dr. Chen asked. Eleanor nodded, still looking at the mountains. Yes, but not for the reasons I started this journey. Not to prove something or to hold on to Alexander, but because this matters. This changes everything we thought we knew about consciousness, about life and death. It won't bring him back, Dr. Chen said gently. No, Eleanor agreed. And I finally understand that it shouldn't. Death is part of the pattern too. She turned to her friend, her eyes clear and determined. But understanding the pattern, that's what we're here for. That's what humans do. We look into the darkness and try to make sense of what we see. Dr. Chen squeezed her shoulder gently. So, what's our next step? Eleanor turned back to the mountains, to the peak where her son had taken his last breath and where perhaps his consciousness had begun its transformation into something else. We follow the data, she said simply. Wherever it leads. That evening, Eleanor drove alone to the cemetery where Alexander was buried. It was her first visit since the day of the funeral. She placed fresh flowers on the grave, running her fingers over the smooth stone that bore his name. The quantum camera was still there, buried with him, still sending its data to her labs. But she no longer needed it to feel connected to her. Son, I understand now, she whispered to the quiet air. You're not here. You're not anywhere, not as you were. But the pattern continues. And I'll understand it better. For you and for everyone who's ever lost someone they loved. A cool breeze stirred the cemetery trees, sending a shower of autumn leaves spiraling down around her. Eleanor closed her eyes and felt for a moment a sense of peace more profound than anything the neural interface had ever shown her. She had installed a camera in her son's coffin, searching for proof that death wasn't the end. What she had found, instead, was the beginning of a new understanding. Not just of death, but of consciousness itself. And that, she now realized, was a far greater gift than the one she had been seeking.